Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. In the quiet embrace of the night, as the world slows and the stars whisper their silent songs, let your mind drift to a place of wonder. A land where time is ancient, where shadows hold secrets, and where the echoes of forgotten magic still linger in the wind. Tonight, we journey to Middle-earth, a world of kings and wanderers, of elves and dwarves, of great battles and quiet moments beneath the moonlight. But this is not a tale of war or conquest, it is a tale of wisdom, of choices that shape the fate of all things. Gandalf the Grey, the wandering wizard, has walked many paths and seen the rise and fall of ages. But even he, in all his wisdom, has not seen everything. Deep in the ruins of a cursed fortress, he will uncover a spell so powerful it could change the very fabric of the world. A spell that calls to him, whispering promises of knowledge and strength, yet hiding a terrible price. As you close your eyes and let go of the day, allow yourself to be carried by the words to a time before endings and a story yet untold. This is Gandalf and the Forbidden Spell. And so, our journey begins. The halls of Minas Tirith stretched high above the White City, their walls adorned with tapestries that depicted the triumphs and struggles of Middle-earth. The great library, hidden deep within the heart of the city, was a place of knowledge, a sanctum where time itself seemed to pause, allowing wisdom from ages past to linger undisturbed. Here, among the dust-covered shelves and towering bookcases, Gandalf the White wandered with purpose. He had spent many years walking the lands, gathering wisdom, guiding kings, and aiding in the great wars that had shaped Middle-earth. But now, there was a different pull upon his soul, a whisper in the wind, an echo from the past that had brought him here. The war against Sauron had ended, the Dark Lord defeated, yet something gnawed at Gandalf's mind, a lingering sense that all was not yet settled. He had seen too much, known too many powers that lurked beneath the surface of this world, waiting for their moment to rise. The librarian of Minas Tirith, a hunched and ancient man named Haladian, had welcomed him with great reverence, though Gandalf had little patience for formalities. He inquired about the oldest texts, the scrolls and tomes that predated even the rule of Gondor's mightiest kings. Haladian, intrigued but hesitant, led Gandalf to the lower levels of the library, where the air was thick with the scent of parchment and candle wax. "These are the most ancient records, my lord," Haladian said, his voice raspy. "Few have ventured here, and fewer still have understood the words written in these scrolls." Gandalf nodded, brushing his fingers along the spines of tomes bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed with time. He searched with a quiet urgency, allowing his instincts to guide him. Then, a peculiar energy touched his senses, a faint aura of something hidden, something deliberately placed beyond reach. Moving with careful precision, Gandalf traced the old wooden bookshelf with his hand, and at its edge, he noticed a shift in the air. A concealed compartment, perhaps. Pressing his palm against the stone wall beside it, he murmured a soft incantation. The air trembled, dust spilling from the cracks, and with a low creak, a portion of the bookshelf slid open, revealing a narrow recess behind it. There, wrapped in a deep crimson cloth, lay a single, ancient manuscript. Unlike the others, this one was bound in a dark material that shimmered faintly under the dim candlelight. Its cover bore no title, no inscription, only a strange sigil, a swirling pattern reminiscent of a great storm. Gandalf's fingers hovered over it, sensing the power that radiated from within. This was hidden here? Gandalf asked, his voice low, almost wary. Eladian's face paled. I did not know such a thing existed, my lord. Gandalf lifted the manuscript carefully, unwrapping the cloth with deliberate slowness. The moment the fabric fell away, the room seemed to grow colder, the light dimming ever so slightly. The text inside was written in an ancient dialect of Quenya, the language of the Eldar, and yet there were markings intertwined with the words that did not belong to the elves. Dark script, runes that pulsed with an eerie glow. As his eyes scanned the pages, Gandalf felt a presence, a whisper at the edge of his mind. Alarzir. A name. A spell. A power long forgotten. The text spoke of a spell capable of altering the fabric of reality itself, a magic that could rewrite fate, undo death, and reshape Middle-earth according to the wielder's desire. The words warned of great danger, of a price too steep for any mortal or immortal to bear. To wield the power of Alarzir is to stand between time and shadow, to summon what is lost and cast aside what must remain. Gandalf's grip on the book tightened. He had encountered many dangerous magics before, but this was different. This was not the work of Sauron, nor of Morgoth before him. This was something older, something that had existed before even the First Age. And then, beneath the layered scripts, he found a name he had not expected. Curunr. Saruman. Gandalf's breath caught in his throat. The traitorous white wizard had perished, his soul cast into the void, but this manuscript had been in his possession once. The notes scribbled in the margins were unmistakably his. Gandalf traced the words carefully, reading the disjointed thoughts of a mind long corrupted. I have seen the veil beyond. I have glimpsed what lies in shadow. To wield this is to ascend beyond Astari, beyond the will of the Vala themselves. There was desperation in the script, a hunger that even in death could be felt through the ink on the page. Saruman had sought this power, but had he used it? If so, to what end? And why had he hidden it away? Gandalf closed the book abruptly, the air around him swirling with unseen forces. He knew that to read further would invite knowledge that could not be undone. Yet he also knew that if this power remained undiscovered, it could fall into hands far worse than Saruman's. There were always those who sought dominion, who yearned to twist fate to their own will. The remnants of Sauron's servants, the corrupted, the desperate. A chill ran down his spine. If Saruman had known of this and kept it secret, then that meant only one thing: this spell was dangerous beyond comprehension. Even the most arrogant of wizards had feared it. Gandalf exhaled slowly, weighing his next action. He could leave the manuscript buried, locked away in Minas Tirith's deepest vaults. But something told him that was not an option. There was a reason he had been drawn here, a reason this knowledge had surfaced now, after all this time. The White Wizard turned to Eladian. This book never existed, he said firmly. No record of it shall be made. No one must know it was ever found. Eladian swallowed hard and nodded. As you wish, my lord. Gandalf wrapped the manuscript back in its crimson cloth and placed it within his robes. He would take it far from here, where no mortal or elf could claim it. Yet even as he stepped away from the hidden alcove, he could not shake the feeling that the path ahead had already been set in motion. Some spells were meant to remain forgotten. Some knowledge was not meant to be unearthed. And yet, Fate had a way of ensuring that secrets never stayed buried for long. The road to Rivendell was long and winding, stretching through the vast plains of Eriador and into the rolling hills that led toward the misty mountains. Though Gandalf had taken this path many times before, this journey felt different. The weight of the manuscript concealed within his robes pressed against him like an unspoken burden. The air was crisp, the scent of damp earth filling his lungs as his horse trotted steadily forward, but the tranquility of Middle-earth's wilderness did little to calm the storm of thoughts that raged within his mind. The words of the manuscript haunted him. To wield the power of Alazir is to stand between time and shadow, to summon what is lost and cast aside what must remain. What did it mean? Had Saruman understood it fully before his downfall? Had he attempted to use it? If so, what had stopped him? A part of Gandalf feared he already knew the answer. It was near dusk when he reached the ford of Bruinen. The last light of the sun shimmered against the rushing waters, and a gentle mist clung to the valley beyond. The hidden valley of Rivendell lay just ahead, nestled between towering cliffs, untouched by time. The elven refuge had always been a place of solace, a sanctuary from the evils of the world. And yet, as Gandalf urged his horse forward, he could not shake the feeling that he carried a darkness with him, one that did not belong in a place of such purity. As he rode into the city, the elves watched him in silence, their ageless eyes filled with both curiosity and concern. They sensed it too. Elrond awaited him in the Hall of Fire, standing by a tall arched window that overlooked the valley. Though he remained as regal as ever, there was a quiet sadness in his gaze. Perhaps it was the knowledge that the age of elves was fading, that their time in Middle-earth was nearing its end. But when he turned to face Gandalf, there was something else in his expression. Recognition. "You carry a heavy burden, Mithrandir," Elrond said, his voice calm yet piercing. Gandalf did not speak immediately. He stepped forward, lowering his hood, and for a moment the two stood in silence, both knowing that what was about to be discussed would not be easy. At last, Gandalf reached into his robes and placed the manuscript on the table between them. The crimson cloth unraveled, revealing the dark cover beneath. Elrond's expression darkened the moment his eyes fell upon it. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In the archives of Minas Tirith," Gandalf replied. "It was hidden behind a false wall. I doubt even the scholars knew of its existence." Elrond extended his hand, hesitated, then withdrew it as if merely touching the book would bring misfortune upon him. He did not need to open it to know what it contained. "This is a shadow of an age long forgotten," he murmured. "One that was meant to remain buried." Gandalf studied him closely. "You know of it?" Elrond's jaw tightened. He turned away, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out the window. For a long moment, he said nothing, as if weighing the gravity of his words. "The spell written within these pages," he finally said, "was not crafted by elves, nor by the hands of men or dwarves. It is older than our histories, older than the First Age. It is a relic of the time before time." He turned back to Gandalf, his piercing eyes filled with warning. "You should not have brought it here." Gandalf narrowed his gaze. "Then you must understand why I did." Elrond exhaled slowly. "Because you fear what it might unleash." Gandalf nodded. Saruman knew of it. He sought to understand it, perhaps even to wield it. His notes are scattered throughout the margins, his thoughts fractured yet filled with a dangerous curiosity. And yet, something stopped him from using it. He paused. You know what that was? Elrond did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a silver goblet of wine on the nearby table and took a slow sip, as if bracing himself for the memories that threatened to resurface. Long ago, he began, before the rise of Morgoth, before the Valar shaped the world, there were forces that existed beyond our understanding. Not the darkness of evil, nor the light of the West, but something in between, a power that was neither good nor wicked, but dangerous all the same. He placed the goblet down, his fingers tracing its rim. The spell of Alarzir was not created, it was discovered. And those who found it vanished. Gandalf frowned. Vanished? Elrond nodded. Every being who has ever attempted to use its power has been erased. Not killed. Not destroyed. Erased, as if they had never existed at all. A cold silence settled between them. Gandalf felt the weight of Elrond's words pressing down on him, heavier than he had anticipated. That is why Saruman never used it, Elrond continued. For all his arrogance, for all his ambition, he feared oblivion more than anything. He sought dominion, power over all things, but even he knew that to wield this spell was to risk becoming nothing. Gandalf's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. If that is true, he said, then why was the book not destroyed? Elrond's gaze darkened. Because it cannot be. The spell exists outside of time, outside of the will of the Valar themselves. It is woven into the very fabric of existence, beyond our reach. And so it was hidden, buried in secrecy. He looked directly at Gandalf. Until now. A shiver ran through Gandalf's spine. He had thought himself prepared for whatever knowledge the manuscript contained, but this was something far worse than he had imagined. A power that could not be controlled, a spell that did not merely kill, but erased. What do you intend to do with it? Elrond asked. Gandalf hesitated. He had come to Rivendell seeking guidance, but now he was uncertain. The spell could not be destroyed, yet it could not be left unguarded. If it fell into the wrong hands, if any being, mortal or otherwise, dared to attempt its use, it could unravel the very fabric of Middle-earth. I do not know, Gandalf admitted at last. Elrond studied him for a long moment. Then, with quiet finality, he said, then you must decide soon. For I fear that now that the book has been unearthed, its presence will not go unnoticed. A chill settled over Gandalf. He knew Elrond was right. Secrets, once revealed, had a way of drawing those who sought them. And there were still those in the shadows of Middle-earth who would do anything for power. He could only hope that he had not already set something in motion that could not be undone. Gandalf sat alone in the quiet chamber that had been prepared for him in Rivendell, the dim candlelight flickering against the ancient stone walls. Outside, the waterfalls of Imladris whispered their eternal song, a melody that had soothed weary travelers for centuries. But tonight, their sound did little to calm the storm raging in his mind. Before him, the manuscript lay untouched, wrapped once more in its crimson cloth. He had not opened it since his conversation with Elrond, yet its presence was undeniable, like a weight pressing down upon his very soul. The words of the Elven Lord lingered. Every being who has ever attempted to use its power has been erased. Not killed. Not a fate worse than death. Gandalf had faced many evils in his time, Balrogs, Dark Lords, the temptations of power, but this was different. This was not an enemy he could strike down with a sword or outwit with wisdom. This was something beyond comprehension, a power that defied the natural order. And yet, despite the warnings, despite the weight of history pressing against him, a question gnawed at the edges of his mind. If this spell was so dangerous, why had it resurfaced now? He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had spent centuries walking the paths of Middle-earth, and if there was one thing he had learned, it was that nothing happened without reason. Fate, destiny, the will of the Vala, call it what one would, but something had guided him to that hidden manuscript. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Enter," he said. The door creaked open, and in stepped an elf clad in traveling garb, his cloak dusted with the dirt of a long journey. He was young by elven standards, though his sharp eyes carried the wisdom of many years. "Arister," Gandalf greeted, surprised by the visit. "You've returned sooner than expected." Arister, one of Elrond's most trusted advisors, bowed his head slightly. "My Lord Elrond sent word to summon me when he learned of your arrival." His gaze flickered to the cloth-covered book on the table. "He did not tell me why, but I can see now that something dire has come to Rivendell." Gandalf gestured for him to sit. "I would not call it dire," he said carefully, "but it is troubling." Arister lowered himself into the chair across from Gandalf, his expression unreadable. "Then I would hear it, if you were willing to share." For a moment, Gandalf hesitated. He trusted Arister, his wisdom was second only to Elrond's, but to speak of the manuscript was to acknowledge the danger it carried. And yet, he knew he could not bear this burden alone. With a slow, deliberate movement, Gandalf pulled away the crimson cloth, revealing the manuscript beneath. Arister's eyes darkened immediately. "That book," he whispered. "You recognize it?" Arister did not answer right away. He reached out but did not touch the cover, his fingers hovering just above it. A faint tremor ran through his hand before he withdrew it entirely, as if burned. "I have not seen it before," he admitted, "but I have heard whispers of it." Gandalf's eyes sharpened. "From whom?" Arister hesitated again, then spoke, his voice low. "There have been rumors in the east. Strange movements among the remnants of Sauron's forces. The orcs are restless, but more concerning than that, there are whispers of a figure gathering power in the ruins of Dol Guldur." Gandalf's stomach tightened. "Dol Guldur is abandoned." Arister shook his head. "So we believed. But something stirs there. The scouts who traveled near Mirkwood reported seeing figures moving through the ruins, shadows that do not belong to the natural world." He paused, his expression grave. "Some claim that a sorcerer has taken residence there." A shadow passed over Gandalf's face. "A sorcerer?" "None know his name," Arister admitted. "But those who have dared to draw too close have not returned." Gandalf's thoughts raced. Dol Guldur, the fortress where Sauron had once hidden in secrecy before revealing himself as the Dark Lord. It had been abandoned since the fall of his forces, but if someone had returned there... He looked back at the manuscript. Had this been the reason the spell had revealed itself to him now? Arister's voice lowered further, almost hesitant. "And there is more." Gandalf's gaze snapped back to him. The Dundane have reported strange occurrences near the northern borders of Arnor, Arister continued. Entire villages abandoned without signs of struggle. No bodies. No tracks leading away. Just emptiness. Gandalf's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. Erased. The word echoed in his mind, heavy with meaning. Arister studied his face, his sharp mind piecing together the implications. You believe it is connected. Gandalf exhaled, rubbing his temple. I do not believe in coincidence. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of the waterfalls beyond the walls of Rivendell. At last, Arister straightened. If Dol Guldur has become a place of darkness once more, and if this spell has resurfaced, then we must act. But what is to be done? Gandalf closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped to leave this place with a simple answer, to lock the manuscript away, to forget it as so many others had before him. But now, it was clear that the choice had already been made for him. He opened his eyes. I must go to Dol Guldur. Arister frowned. Alone? I cannot risk bringing others into this until I understand what we are facing, Gandalf said firmly. But I would ask you to send word to the Rangers of the North. Tell them to watch the borders carefully. If another village vanishes, I want to know immediately. Arister nodded. And Elrond? Gandalf hesitated. Elrond must remain here. He has seen enough sorrow in his time, this burden need not fall upon him. Arister did not argue. He knew better than most that Gandalf carried his burdens alone. At last, the elf rose from his seat. Then I will do as you ask. He glanced once more at the manuscript, a flicker of unease passing over his face. Be careful, Mithrandir. There are powers in this world even you may not be able to withstand. Gandalf managed a small, weary smile. That is always the risk, my friend. As Arister departed, Gandalf turned back to the manuscript. He reached forward and traced his fingers over the strange sigil on its cover. The air seemed to hum beneath his touch. Dol Guldur. He would find the truth there. And, if fate willed it, he would ensure that no one ever laid hands upon this spell again, even if it meant facing the darkness alone. The road to Dol Guldur was long and perilous, stretching through the vast wilderness of Middle-earth like a scar upon the land. Gandalf traveled swiftly, his cloak billowing behind him as he urged his horse forward. The forests of Eriador soon gave way to the desolate lands near the Anduin, where the trees grew twisted, their blackened limbs reaching skyward like skeletal hands. The air changed as he approached the borders of Mirkwood, growing thick with an unnatural stillness. The once great forest had long been a place of darkness, a remnant of Sauron's taint, and though his shadow had been cast down, the echoes of his malice still lingered in its depths. The trees whispered as he passed, rustling without wind, as if something unseen moved between the branches. Gandalf tightened his grip on his staff. As the land grew darker, he dismounted, leading his horse through the thick undergrowth. The path to Dol Guldur was not one that could be taken carelessly. Even in the years since the necromancer had been driven out, the fortress had remained a place of dread. Few dared to venture near it, and fewer still returned to speak of what they had seen. As night fell, he reached a small rise overlooking the ruins. The fortress loomed in the distance, its jagged spires clawing at the sky, shrouded in mist that seemed to cling unnaturally to its walls. The very sight of it filled the air with an oppressive weight, as if the land itself recoiled from its presence. Dol Guldur. The last time he had been here, it had been to face the darkness that had festered within its halls. Now, something else had taken root in its place. He could feel it, a presence, old and hungry, stirring beneath the stone. He took a slow breath and stepped forward. The entrance lay in ruins, half collapsed from the battles that had raged here during the War of the Ring. But even as he passed through the broken gate, he could sense that the fortress had not been entirely abandoned. The air was too thick, too heavy with unseen malice. Something waited within. He moved carefully through the crumbling corridors, his staff illuminating the darkness with a faint blue glow. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting unnaturally as he passed. The deeper he went, the more certain he became he was not alone. A whisper echoed through the halls. A voice, distant yet close, speaking words he could not understand. Gandalf stopped, his grip tightening on his staff. The shadows thickened. The walls seemed to close in around him. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. Tall and cloaked in tattered black robes, its face obscured by a hood, the figure stood motionless at the far end of the corridor. No breath, no sound, only the weight of its presence pressing against the air like an unseen hand. Gandalf raised his staff. "Who are you?" The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a single hand, long fingers curling slightly as if grasping at something unseen. The whispering grew louder. And then, pain. A sudden, searing force crashed into Gandalf's mind, like claws raking through his thoughts. He staggered back, his vision blurring, his very essence pulling away from him as if something were trying to unmake him. He gritted his teeth and slammed his staff into the ground. A burst of light erupted outward, scattering the darkness, forcing the figure to recoil. The pressure in his mind lessened, but it did not fade entirely. The presence remained, lingering like a shadow in his thoughts. Gandalf steadied himself. "You will fell magic," he said, his voice firm. "But you will find me no easy prey." The figure remained still for a moment. Then, slowly, it lowered its hand. The whispering ceased, and silence fell once more. Then it spoke. "You should not have come here." The voice was hollow, echoing unnaturally in the empty corridor. It was not the voice of one, but many, layered upon each other like the shifting of dead leaves in the wind. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he asked again. The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it turned slightly, as if listening to something unseen. When it spoke again, its voice was quieter, almost amused. "You already know." And with that, it vanished. The darkness receded. The weight upon the air lessened. But Gandalf did not move. He stood in the empty corridor, heart pounding, mind racing. The figure was right. He did know. This was no mere sorcerer. No ordinary shade. This was something far worse. And it had been waiting for him. Slowly, Gandalf turned and made his way back toward the entrance. He had learned enough for now. He needed time to think, to prepare. But one thing was certain. Whatever dwelled in Dol Guldur had awakened. And it knew his name. Gandalf did not leave Dol Guldur immediately. He knew better than to turn his back on such darkness without understanding it first. He remained at the edge of the ruins, standing among the crumbled remains of an old watchtower, letting the cool night air settle his thoughts. The encounter had shaken him, not just because of the power he had felt, but because of the certainty in the figure's voice. "You already know." And he did. He had felt such darkness before, long ago, when he had first confronted Sauron in this very place. But this was not the Dark Lord returned, nor was it one of his lesser servants. This presence was different. It was ancient, cold, and calculating. And it had been waiting for him. Gandalf leaned on his staff, his sharp eyes scanning the mist-shrouded ruins below. He had felt the presence withdraw, but that did not mean it was gone. Whatever was here had chosen not to confront him fully. That meant it was either testing him or preparing for something far worse. He could not leave without knowing what that something was. Taking a slow breath, he turned back toward the ruined fortress. His fingers tightened around the handle of his sword, glancing as he stepped forward. Though the blade was silent, it was ready, sensing the malice in the air. The deeper he ventured into the ruins, the colder it became. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against him like an unseen force. The shadows stretched unnaturally, moving in ways that defied logic. And then he heard it. A whisper. Not words, not a voice, but something deeper, a presence brushing against the edges of his mind, just as it had before. But this time, he did not resist. He let it come, let it seep into his thoughts. And for a moment, he saw a great city, long abandoned, its towers broken, its streets drowned in fog. Statues of forgotten kings crumbled beneath the weight of time. And in the center, upon a throne of black stone, sat a figure cloaked in shadow. Not Sauron. Not a Nazgul. Something older. The vision shattered as Gandalf gasped, his body jolting as if struck. He stumbled back, gripping his staff for support as reality returned to him. The ruins of Dol Guldur came into focus once more, the whispering fading into the wind. But the message had been clear. This was no mere remnant of Sauron's evil. This was something deeper, something that predated even the rise of the Dark Lord himself. And then, from the shadows, came a single word. A name. Durian. Gandalf froze. It was a name he had not heard in an age, one spoken only in whispers, buried in the deepest records of Middle-earth's past. Durian had once been a great sorcerer, a master of forgotten magics, one who had sought power beyond the reach of even the Vala. But his name had vanished from history, his deeds erased as if they had never been. And now, here, in the ruins of Dol Guldur, his name had been spoken once more. Gandalf's pulse quickened. The forbidden spell. The manuscript. The vanished villages. It was all connected. Durian had returned. Or worse, he had never truly left. A chill ran through him. If this was true, then Middle-earth faced a danger unlike any it had ever known. Sauron had been a tyrant, but Durian was something else entirely. He had not sought to rule, he had sought to unmake. Gandalf turned, his decision made. He could not linger here any longer. He had his answer, and now he needed to act. As he stepped away from the ruins, the shadows behind him stirred once more, shifting like living things. The presence did not follow, did not try to stop him. It had already told him what he needed to know, and it knew he would return. Gandalf rode hard from Dol Guldur, his mind a tempest of thought. The name Girion echoed within him like the tolling of a bell from ages past. A name long forgotten, erased from history by those who had feared what it represented. The storm clouds above Mirkwood gathered thickly as he left the ruined fortress behind. A foul wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the remnants of the darkness he had touched. He could still feel it, that cold and ancient presence, watching him from the shadows of Dol Guldur. Girion had spoken his name, had allowed him to hear it. That alone was a warning. But Gandalf did not ride toward Rivendell or Lothlorien, where wisdom and sanctuary might be found. No, his path led him elsewhere. If there was any hope of countering the darkness that stirred once more, he would need more than counsel. He would need allies. Days later, he arrived in Rohan. Edoras stood proud upon its hill, its golden halls gleaming beneath the morning sun. The air was crisp with the scent of the plains, but something beneath the beauty of the land unsettled him. The people he passed in the streets cast wary glances, their movements quick and uneasy. A shadow had fallen over the Rittermark, though it was not yet clear to them. Gandalf wasted no time. He strode through the great doors of Meduseld, his staff tapping sharply against the stone floor. Eomer, king of Rohan, turned as he entered, his keen eyes narrowing with recognition. He stood tall, clad in the armor of his people, his golden hair bound behind him. Gandalf, Eomer greeted, though his voice held concern. You return unannounced, and I see by your haste that you do not bring tidings of peace. There is no peace where I have ridden, my friend, Gandalf said grimly. A shadow stirs once more in Dol Guldur. The hall grew silent. The Rohirrim present turned their heads, unease flickering in their eyes. Though Sauron had fallen, his darkness had touched all lands, and the mention of Dol Guldur brought forth memories of war. Eomer stepped forward. Tell me what you have seen. Gandalf spoke plainly, recounting the visions, the presence he had felt, and most of all, the name. When he spoke it, a hush fell over the hall. Girion, Eomer murmured. He did not know the name, but he could hear the weight in it. What is he? Gandalf's expression darkened. A sorcerer of the ancient world. Older than the wars we have known, older even than the kingdoms of men. He sought power beyond the reach of gods and kings alike. He was cast into the abyss by the might of the Vala themselves, or so we believed. But now, he has returned. Eomer took a slow breath, his gaze lowering in thought. At last, he spoke. You seek warriors. Gandalf nodded. I need those who will stand against the dark when it comes. The riders of Rohan have never fled from war, and war is coming, whether we wish it or not. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. You shall have them. But Rohan alone would not be enough. Gandalf rode next to Gondor, where Minas Tirith stood defiant against the rolling skies. There, he met with Aragorn, High King of the reunited kingdom, whose wisdom and strength had brought peace to the lands of men. Aragorn listened carefully as Gandalf spoke, his hands resting upon the armrests of his throne. When Gandalf finished, the king's face was unreadable. So it is true, Aragorn said at last. The darkness was not wholly vanquished. It never is, Gandalf replied softly. So long as fear lingers in the hearts of men, there will always be those who seek to shape it into power. Aragorn stood, his cloak shifting behind him. You have the riders of Rohan, but you will need more. The elves, Gandalf said. Aragorn nodded. Lothlorien still stands, and the elves of Rivendell remain. Yet this is a threat that concerns all free peoples. They must be called upon. Gandalf inclined his head. Then it is to Rivendell I must go next. The journey took him through the lands of Eriador, past the ruins of Old Arnor, where shadows of past battles still clung to the earth. He traveled swiftly, though his thoughts were heavier than before. When he reached Rivendell, the air of the valley was thick with sorrow. The elves were departing. Their time in Middle-earth was ending, and the great halls of Elrond were quieter than they had once been. Many had sailed west, leaving only a few behind. Elrond greeted Gandalf solemnly. You come seeking aid, yet you find a people who are fading. But not yet gone, Gandalf countered. Elrond studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Tell me what has brought you here. And so Gandalf spoke again of Girion, of the whispers in Dol Guldur, of the spell that had been unleashed upon the world. Elrond's expression was grave. This name has not been spoken in an age. The records of his deeds were burned, his works erased, his very existence buried in time. He exhaled slowly. And yet, he has returned. I ask not for an army, Gandalf said. Only for those who will stand against him when the time comes. Elrond was silent for a long time. Then he turned, glancing toward the halls beyond. There are those who have not yet left, he admitted. Elves who remember the battles of old. They will not turn away from such a call. It was more than Gandalf had hoped for. Then we may have a chance, he murmured. As Gandalf departed Rivendell, the pieces were falling into place. Rohan had answered. Gondor stood ready. The elves, though diminished, would not remain idle. But it was not yet enough. He had gathered allies. Now, he needed knowledge. There was only one place left to go. The mines of Khazad-dûm. If there were any records left of Girion's fall, any remnants of the past that had been hidden away, they would be found in the deep libraries of the dwarves. The Longbeards had kept secrets older than men, older than even the elves. And deep within the halls of stone, where Durin's kin still walked, Gandalf hoped to find the truth. The truth of what they faced. The truth of how to stop it. And the truth of the price they would pay. The road to Khazad-dûm was long and perilous. Though the dwarves had reclaimed their ancestral home, the scars of the past still remained. The depths of Moria were vast, its tunnels winding like the veins of the mountains themselves, and there were whispers that some shadows still lingered in its forgotten corners. Gandalf rode swiftly, his journey taking him through the wilds of Eriador and down into the misty mountains. He moved with urgency, knowing that time was slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. The alliance was forming, but they were still blind to the full extent of the danger. Knowledge would be their greatest weapon, and if there was any place in Middle-earth that held the secrets of Girion, it would be the great libraries of the dwarves. As he neared the entrance to Khazad-dûm, the mountains loomed high above him, their peaks crowned with mist. The great doors of Moria stood open, no longer sealed in darkness as they once had been. Dwarven guards stood at attention, their axes gleaming in the torchlight. They regarded Gandalf with cautious respect. He was a friend of their people, but his arrival was unannounced. One of the guards, clad in ornate armor, stepped forward. "You are far from the lands of men, Mithrandir." "I have come seeking counsel," Gandalf replied. "And perhaps something more." The dwarf studied him, then nodded. "King Durin will want to hear of this." Khazad-dûm was no longer a tomb of silence and ruin. The great halls of the dwarves echoed once more with the sounds of hammer and chisel, of voices raised in song and work. Braziers burned brightly, casting long shadows against the ancient stone. The deep places of the world had been reclaimed, and though there was still much to rebuild, the Longbeards stood proud in their halls once again. Gandalf was led through the grand corridors, past towering pillars and wide bridges that spanned the deep chasms. The air smelled of earth and iron, the scent of a kingdom reborn. At last, he was brought before the throne of Durin VII, the new king under the mountain. The dwarf lord sat upon a seat of stone and gold, his beard long and braided, his eyes sharp with wisdom and age. He had the look of his ancestors, the bearing of kings long past. "Mithrandir," Durin greeted. "It has been many years since last you set foot in these halls. I hope you have not brought ill tidings." Gandalf inclined his head. "I fear I have, my friend." And so, once more, he told his tale. He spoke of Dol Guldur, of the whispers in the dark, of the forbidden spell and the name that had returned from the depths of time. When he spoke the name Garion, a heavy silence fell over the hall. The dwarves who stood nearby shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. It was clear the name was not unknown to them. Durin's brow furrowed. "That name has not been spoken in a long, long time." Gandalf leaned forward. "Then you know of him?" The dwarf king let out a slow breath. "Not many do. His name was erased from the histories of men and elves. But the dwarves do not forget. We remember the evils that have walked this world." He gestured to a nearby attendant who hurried away into the depths of the hall. "There are records, fragments, buried in the oldest archives of our kin. If what you say is true, then they must be brought forth." Gandalf nodded. "I must know everything. How he fell, what his power was, and how he can be stopped." Durin's expression darkened. "You seek knowledge of an enemy whose power was said to rival the Maya themselves." Gandalf's grip tightened on his staff. "Then we must understand that power before it is too late." The archives of Khazad-dûm were deep within the mountain, carved into the very roots of the earth. Gandalf followed the dwarven scribes through twisting passages and narrow stairways, where walls were lined with ancient stone tablets and dust-covered tomes. The air was thick with age, and the flickering torchlight made the shadows dance upon the walls. At last, they came to a great chamber, where an elder scribe carefully unrolled a scroll upon a stone table. The parchment was old, its edges brittle, but the writing was still clear, written in a language that had not been spoken in millennia. The scribe looked up at Gandalf. "This is the oldest record we have." Gandalf's eyes moved across the text, his mind racing to interpret its meaning. What he read chilled him to the core. Garion had once been a man, but not just any man. He had been one of the first sorcerers of Middle-earth, long before the forging of the Rings of Power. He had delved into magics that even the elves feared, seeking knowledge from beyond the veil of the world. And he had found something. The scroll spoke of a ritual, a spell so forbidden that even Morgoth had shunned it. It was a magic that could rewrite the very fabric of existence, bending fate itself to the will of the caster. But the cost had been terrible. Girion had vanished, his name struck from history. The few who had known of him believed he had been destroyed by the Vala, cast into the void where no mortal or immortal could reach him. But now, after an age of silence, he had returned. Gandalf straightened, his heart pounding. If Girion still lived, then he had found a way to defy even the judgment of the gods. And if he still sought the power he had once pursued, then Middle-earth was in greater peril than it had ever known. "What does the spell do?" he asked quietly. The scribe hesitated. "There are no clear records. Only warnings. It was said to grant power beyond imagining, but at a cost no one was willing to name." Durin, who had followed them into the chamber, crossed his arms. "If this sorcerer still walks the world, what do you intend to do?" Gandalf was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I will stop him." Durin chuckled darkly. "Alone?" Gandalf shook his head. "No, not alone. The alliance was forming. Rohan and Gondor had answered the call. The elves had lent what strength remained to them. And now, the dwarves, the keepers of lost knowledge, had given him the final piece. Girion had not yet revealed his full strength. But he would. And when he did, they would be ready. Gandalf turned to Durin. "Will you stand with us when the time comes?" The Dwarf King met his gaze, and for a moment there was only silence between them. Then, at last, Durin nodded. "The dwarves do not forget their debts, Mithrandir. If a storm is coming, then we will meet it with steel and fire." Gandalf exhaled, a small weight lifting from his shoulders. "Then the battle is not yet lost." As he left the halls of Khazad-dûm, the mountain winds howled through the valleys, carrying the scent of the coming storm. The final battle was drawing near. Girion had waited in the shadows long enough. And now, Gandalf would bring the light. The gathering storm had finally broken. Across Middle-earth, the winds carried whispers of doom. From the plains of Rohan to the white towers of Gondor, from the silent woods of Lothlorien to the deep halls of Khazad-dûm, all who had answered the call now marched toward their fate. Girion had not remained idle. Darkness poured from Dol Guldur, rising like a great shroud over the lands. Strange lights flickered in the night, and shadows moved where none should have been. The air carried a deep, unnatural chill. Those who passed too near the accursed fortress spoke of whispers in the wind, voices of the long-dead calling from beyond the veil. Gandalf had seen enough of dark sorcery to recognize what was happening. Girion had begun his spell. If they did not stop him now, it would be too late. They gathered upon the borders of Mirkwood, where the land had turned sickly under Girion's influence. The assembled host was unlike any seen since the War of the Ring. Rohirrim cavalry stood ready, their spears gleaming beneath the stormy sky. Gondor's finest warriors formed ranks, their shields locked in unshakable resolve. From Khazad-dûm, the dwarves had come, their axes keen and their eyes fierce. And among them stood the remnants of the elves, the last of those who had not yet sailed into the west. Gandalf stood at the forefront, his staff in hand, his robes billowing in the wind. Beside him, Aragorn, King of Gondor, adjusted his grip on Enduril. Legolas and Gimli stood ready, side by side as always, while Eomer sat astride his steed, eyes blazing with defiance. "Are we certain he is here?" Aragorn asked, scanning the darkness ahead. Gandalf nodded. He is waiting for us. He has no need to hide now. Even as he spoke, the gates of Dol Guldur groaned open, and from within, the darkness emerged. They came in great numbers, figures twisted by dark sorcery, their forms no longer fully human or beast. Durian's magic had bent them into things of nightmare, and they surged forward with unholy speed. The battle was joined. The riders of Rohan thundered forth, meeting the enemy's charge in a clash of steel and fury. Gondorian swords cut through the creatures like fire through dry wood, but for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. The dwarves fought with grim determination, their axes biting deep into the monstrous foes. The elves, graceful even in war, wove through the chaos like spirits, their arrows striking true. Gandalf moved through the battlefield like a storm-given form, his staff flashing with light, each strike sending waves of power rippling through the enemy ranks. Yet the darkness did not falter. And then, from the gates of Dol Guldur, he emerged. Durian. He did not look like a man. Not anymore. His body was wrapped in flowing robes of deepest black, though they seemed almost weightless, as if woven from the void itself. His face was hidden behind an ancient mask, and his eyes, 2 burning embers, shone from the darkness beneath. He held no weapon, but his very presence was an assault upon the world. The air around him twisted, warping reality itself. He raised a hand, and the battlefield shuddered. A pulse of energy erupted from him, and warriors on both sides were thrown to the ground. The sky darkened further, swirling with unnatural clouds, and the earth trembled beneath their feet. Gandalf stepped forward. Durian, he called, his voice steady. It is over. The sorcerer's voice came like a whisper on the wind, yet it carried through the battlefield, seeping into every mind. You are too late, Mithrandir. Gandalf could feel it. The spell was nearing completion. The very air was thick with power, coiling and twisting like a serpent ready to strike. If Durian finished his work, the world as they knew it would be undone. There was only one choice left. Gandalf raised his staff. For a moment, time seemed to slow. He called upon the power within him, not the fire and fury of battle, but the light of the Maya, the gift he had carried since the days before the world was shaped. A golden glow spread outward, pushing against the darkness. Durian raised a hand to counter him, but this time the light did not falter. Gandalf stepped forward, his voice rising in a language older than men, older even than elves. Words of power, words of command. The magic of the world itself, woven into a single moment. Durian staggered, his form flickering. No, the sorcerer hissed. You do not understand what you are doing. I understand enough, Gandalf said. The light surged forward, engulfing them both. The battlefield was blinded. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but light. A great silence fell over the land. The storm above stilled. The wind ceased. Even the echoes of war were swallowed by the radiance. And then, a single sound. A deep, shattering crack. The darkness that had clung to Dol Guldur for so long split apart, vanishing like smoke in the wind. The ground steadied. The air became still once more. Durian was gone. Gandalf stood in the center of it all, his staff broken in two, his robes scorched, his face lined with exhaustion. It was over. The silence stretched. Then, one by one, the warriors of Rohan, Gondor, and Khazad-dûm lifted their weapons in salute. A great cheer rose into the air, carrying with it the relief of victory hard won. Gandalf closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. It had been costly. Many had fallen, but the world had been saved once more. Aragorn approached, placing a hand on Gandalf's shoulder. "Will you be all right?" Gandalf managed a tired smile. "I am old, my friend, but I think I shall manage." Eomer rode forward, glancing at the ruins of Dol Guldur. "And what of this place?" Gandalf exhaled. "Let it be forgotten. Let it crumble into dust. No power will rise from these ruins again." And so, the armies departed. The riders of Rohan galloped homeward, their banners flying high. Gondor's soldiers marched back to their white city, where songs of victory would soon fill the halls. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm returned to their deep kingdom, their names written in the annals of history. The elves, those who remained, turned their faces toward the sea. Their time was ending, and soon the last of them would sail west. Gandalf watched them go, his heart heavy and light all at once. His journey was ending, too. There would be no more wars for him. No more battles. No more spells. He had done what he had come to do. And soon, he, too, would leave Middle-earth behind. But for now, he simply watched the sun rise over the land he had loved for so long. A new day had come, and Middle-earth would endure. The end. The journey has come to an end. The echoes of battle have faded, and the land breathes once more in quiet peace. The weight of destiny has lifted, and Middle-earth stands unchanged, yet never quite the same. Gandalf, the wise wanderer, has walked his final road in this tale. The choices he made, the light he carried, will linger long after the stars have turned. Some stories are written in stone, others in the whispers of the wind, but all leave their mark, shaping the world in ways unseen. As the night deepens and the world outside grows still, let your mind rest in the comfort of the tale. Let the voices of Middle-earth fade into dreams, where adventure waits in the quiet corners of sleep. If you enjoyed this journey, there are many more to tell. Until then, may your dreams be filled with wonder, and may the light always find its way to you.